Hello again, this is Dr. Mike, and we are looking at week 3 of our Philosophy 300 course. And this week you're going to be dealing with what we often call the worldview. That is your outlook from your mind and your thinking and your education and your upbringing and your environment. All those things come together to give you a particular outlook on life that comes from your mind and from philosophy. You have a philosophy of life, if you will. Sometimes, if you are religious and you're a Christian, we talk about a Christian worldview, that we take a particular viewpoint of the world based upon our religious beliefs, and people do vary that a great deal. So there's a lot of different ideas with religion and worldview, but there's also others. You can have a secular worldview where you don't have any religion at all interfering with your thinking processes, and usually very highly intelligent people will be very proud of their secular view. But that all comes about with the development of your mind. And we talked a little bit in the last 2 lectures on developmental psychology, where we look at a person's mind development over the period from birth until geriatrics, when they get really old. And developmental has a very big piece of what we talk about when we look at how the human mind develops over time. It means that the question there is between nurture and nature. How much of what you learn and who you are depends upon the nurture that you were given as a child. I mean, they now believe that a child, if it can be held within the first minutes that it's outside the womb, makes a very big difference in how that child will fare as it goes through life. That would be nurture. Then there's nature. There's the environment that we live in that produces things in us to either make us good or bad. Clarence Darrow in 1924-25 tried the first case in Chicago and actually got the 2 guys off for murder based upon their environment, made them do it. Living in an environment of violence will turn out to make children more violent, and so on. And then there are universal and ecological developments that go into all those things to make your brain what it is. If you have children, what you feed your child, what you allow them to watch on television, what you allow them to do academically to learn and to grow and to play. Play has become a major thing in the development of children now, that they study to see if a child plays properly. It ends up making them much more prepared mentally to face the outside world. We also have a lot of discussion these days about prenatal treatment. And if you've had children, you know that doctors start you now on this path of vitamins and taking care of yourself long before your baby is born, because the baby draws nutrients from you. And if it doesn't get proper nutrients, of course, then it's going to be malformed and not a normal adaptation. Drugs will do that. Taking drugs while you're pregnant can often cause a baby to be born addicted, just like the mother. So when we look at newborns, you think about a lot of different things. We look at the reflexes. They check the baby's reflexes soon after the womb. They look at its activity. They look at its sex and gender development, and they look at its various senses to see if a child is developing properly. We have a lot of issues these days that are being argued over, children that have ADHD or all those things. What causes that? Or, different kind of syndromes that they can be born with that are caused either by prenatal development or by genetics or by a lot of other factors. But that does go into the developing mind. So what physical changes occur from infancy to childhood? Sigmund Freud believed that the first 6 years of a child, from 0 to 6, most of its personality was formed based upon reactions and things that it went through. And I tend to think, I'm an old Freudian in a lot of ways. I tend to think Freud had some points there that were well worth making. But when a baby is born, its nervous system will continue to develop. Its lungs will continue to develop. One of the issues with a preemie baby being born is that the lungs aren't fully developed, and they have to put them in an incubator for a period of time for them to grow and their lungs to reach maturity. A lot of those things will happen. Motor development, and then, of course, gender development in childhood. So those things are all very, very important. We have a lot of issues today where people want to argue about identity development and gender. And I'm here to tell you that we don't know everything there is to know about that. One big discussion these days is transsexuality and homosexuality, those kind of things. I tend to believe those are genetic, and I have been a pastor, so I know the other arguments and the religious arguments, and I know the scientific arguments, and I can say with some assurance that you don't learn to be those things, that you are born with those kind of genetic issues and have to learn to live with them and make your way through life with them. Just like everybody, other people are born with different things that they have to overcome or learn to live with or accept. So cognition, or how a brain works during infancy and childhood, there are a lot of different theories about that, and I'm not going to just repeat those for you because you'll read them. But Jean Piaget, his theory of cognitive development probably makes the most sense to us, the different stages. And you can see that if you've had a child, you know that they go through different stages of development. Social emotional behaviors change from infancy to childhood, and they definitely change again in adolescence. So what do we mean by adolescence? I mean, physical changes start to take place, sex, gender, adolescent changes, and the adolescent brain. They have actually done brainwave tests to prove that a teenager's brain is developing and does not act, it's growing toward normality. But there's a period there from 13 to 21 where what my parents used to call your brain dead, trying to find your way in the world. And so they have to experience psychology, have to experience the motivational factors that go into becoming an adult human being. It's quite a transition, and think about how the brain thinks and how it operates. Then we think about the individual mind from young adult to midlife. And there again, midlife, we'd often talk about the midlife crisis. What kind of changes happen in midlife crisis? People go through divorces, they go through deaths and loss, and they go through gaining new members of their family. All those things have an effect on your thinking and upon your attitude. Late adult life, as we've said, will be another major change as you transition into your senior years and approaching, passing. There's a lot of cognition that gets interfered with medication. A lot of it is done with things like Alzheimer's or dementia. So when we think about the individual person, we ask ourselves the question about personality. Every person has a unique personality. Now, there may be some pieces of that you take from parents that are genetic, but by and large, you develop that personality over a period of time. There are a lot of different historical approaches to that. Sigmund Freud came up with the idea that there are three parts to your personality: the id, the ego, the superego. Your id are those basic carnal desires, if I can use that word, that desire to do bad, to do wrong, to do whatever you want, to get whatever you want. You take a baby when it's first born, very much in that id phase. It wants a bottle, or it wants candy, or it wants something to drink, and it doesn't take long for it to start screaming and letting you know that. That's the id. Then you have the superego, where you teach people that's the moral part of you, in which you will, those are the things that you don't do, your list of mores, whatever it is, in your particular worldview that keeps you, thou shalt nots, if you will. And the ego in the middle is the one that kind of balances the two. How do you get your needs and yet meet your ethical requirements? Freud says we have different defense mechanisms that we throw up. And if you study psychology from a forensic standpoint, this is fascinating. Why do people answer the way they do? How can you tell if a person's lying? All those things, those are all defense mechanisms that we tend to use. And I tend to be a neo-Freudian. I have an undergrad in psychology and a minor in philosophy. So that is, and if I go for degree number 11, I think I still might do a forensic psychology master's degree, because it is so interesting in how the brain works. If I had to trade my whole education for one class, it would probably be a psychology class. I think I said that in the first tape. But so there are a lot of theories that explain personality, why you act the way you do, why you are the way you are, and also situations will, by the same token, will affect your personality. Early trait theories, things like that that are in you will explain a lot of those things. And so, loss of control. Why is it that some people can't have a terrible temper and they can't control their temper? A lot of those kind of things would come under this kind of heading. There is a biological basis for personality. There are certain temperaments, and if you've ever taken the test of your temperaments, those are fairly accurate, I think. Genetics has a lot to do with personality. Men and women usually think differently, act differently, and then brain structure and brain function will have a big way to do that. So how do we assess a person's personality? You can actually take a test. We take IQ tests. We take Rorschach ink blot tests, all kind of things to assess a person's personality, to do a personality inventory, and be able to think scientifically about and label, certain diseases and certain things like that. So what does it mean to have a self? Now, I think personally, my idea of this is that very much like what in Christianity we used to call the possession of a soul. You have a self-concept, there's a self-awareness, there's self-esteem. Many of you probably, like me, struggle with self-esteem. Growing up in a very father's home that was very dominant, and it tends to damage your self-esteem a lot of times, and that comes to us. Most men get their self-esteem from their father, and most girls will take some from their father, some from their mother, but it is a major thing. The other thing that is quite interesting in personality is ideas of gender, race, and culture and self-esteem. Different cultures, people think differently. And that's one of the important parts of education, is that we learn to think differently, realize that others think differently. And it's very important that we learn that, accept that. Not everybody thinks the way you do. Not everybody sees the world the same way that you see it. You will have different people with different worldviews. If you talk to a Jewish person or a Muslim person or a Buddhist person or a Hindu person, all of them will have certain differences in their worldview and why we're in the world and what we're doing here. So all these things together help us to develop what we call the connected mind. What's going on, I think it's very interesting, and I hope you'll be interested in pursuing your ideas in coming days about what's involved in the human mind. Think about thinking. Think about your children as they develop. How do they develop over time, and how do they mature? And think about yourself. How are you maturing? What are you? You ought to be happy. If you're not happy, then there's some part of this equation that needs to be thought about and worked on and maybe corrected. So hopefully you've gotten something out of these lectures and out of this class that will prove to be a help to you and encouragement. And I hope that you'll get to take another psychology class at some point in your academic career, because I think it's very much worth your time. Thanks.